Our CLE presentation today is on lawyer well-being, and our speaker is Joan Beeblehausen, who's the Executive Director of Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers. Joan received her JD from the University of Minnesota and is admitted to practice in the state of Minnesota. She has significant training in the areas of counseling, mental health and addiction, diversity, employment issues, and management. And she has spent more than 2 decades working with lawyers who are at a crossroads because of mental illness and addiction concerns, as well as work-life balance issues, stress, and other related things that come up. So please help me welcome Joan.
Thanks, Liz. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Hi, everybody, and hi to those of you who are online. So today we're going to talk about a report that is 70-some pages. It has 44 recommendations for 7 groups of stakeholders. Doesn't that sound exciting? And what I'm going to try and do is see if you want to talk a little bit, and if you don't, I can give you information and I can give you ideas about how to think about this. It's a really big topic. It's, I think, a really important topic, and I think what we're talking about is changing the culture in our profession, changing the toxicity that sometimes exists in our profession because of the work we do, because of what we're exposed to. So how many of you are public attorneys who are here live? Okay, all right. And can I get some examples of some of the other places that folks are here from? How many in law firms? Okay. Legal aid, anybody legal aid? Okay. Non-traditional practice? Okay. Anybody in companies? In-house? Okay. So mostly public attorneys, I guess. And that's kind of what I would expect. And that includes law clerks, by the way. So if you didn't raise your hand for that, I'll assume that some of the people who didn't raise their hands at all are in that category. So I've spoken here a number of times, and usually people don't have questions or comments, but I'm going to be hopeful because it's much more interesting if you don't have to just listen to me. But hopefully this will be interesting enough that it'll give you some things to really think about. I am not going to go point for point through all of the recommendations. However, I'm going to focus on a couple of areas that I think probably might impact most of you. And when I get to what the various groups of stakeholders are, I'll tell you what those are, and then I'll ask if anybody would like me to spend a little time on any of the others. So we'll do it that way. I do encourage questions, and that includes those of you online. So I think Liz will probably post this on the website, so you can see this PowerPoint, you can see the entire report, because I know you can't wait to read it. And it starts with a Minnesota connection. David Brink was the president of the ABA when I was in law school, so you can look that up if you want to know more. And he passed away this summer at the age of 97, a week short of his 98th birthday. And he was also on the LCL board. And we talked to him about this report and that we were working on it, and asked if he would write an endorsement for it. And so he did. And he said that the task force deserves the strong support of every lawyer and bar association. He thought it was really important that this work was being done. And so we're dedicating our work this year to the memory of David Brink. So this task force was formed, and it included people from lots of different entities. I'm not going to list them all, but it included judges, law school people, lawyer regulation people, malpractice people, young lawyers division, lots of others. And so it was really a consortium of people within and outside of the American Bar Association. And the task force came about because there were 2 reports that were written. And if you've attended seminars probably last year or the year before, I spent a fair amount of time on these. One of them was called The Prevalence of Substance Use and Other Mental Health Concerns Among American Attorneys, and it was published in 2016. And it showed that we have higher rates of substance use and mental health issues than the rest of the population. Then, in addition, there was a study published called Suffering in Silence, which was about law school well-being, law student well-being. And both of these had Minnesota connections because Patrick Krill at the time was the director of the Legal Professionals Program at Hazelden Betty Ford. He was one of the authors of the lawyer study. And Jerry Organ, if we have any St. Thomas grads here, is a professor at the University of St. Thomas, and he was instrumental, in fact, the lead author on the law students study. So these two reports were published, and I'll spend a little time on what they, kind of some of the highlights of what they tell us. The law school study, and by the way, this was compared with other graduate students, found, and they surveyed students at 15 law schools. They looked at rural, urban, connected with universities, independent, various parts of the top rankings by U.S. News and World Report and other things. And so they really tried to have a representative sample of all law schools. And 3,300 students actually participated in this. So the researchers that say this is enough for it to be statistically significant, they were all good with this stuff. And so what they looked at was that a quarter of the students were at risk for developing some sort of alcohol use disorder. And they drank at higher rates than other graduate students. They also found that during, and this was kind of during the past year, they met criteria for the illness of depression or for severe anxiety, which I guess doesn't surprise us about law schools, at higher than average rates. 14% met criteria for severe and 23% for mild to moderate anxiety. And 6% said they'd had suicidal thoughts in the last year. So these are some pretty serious numbers. There's lots of other stats about how much they used and how often they used and different things about mental health issues, but one of the things that we really want to focus on here is, do they ask for help? And if not, why not? And the kinds of things that had people feel like they would not look for help were that it would be a threat to their academic status or to their job prospects or to their bar admission. I can do it myself. Everybody else seems to be handling this. And half of them said they thought they would have a better chance of getting admitted if they hid a mental health or substance use problem. And I thought that was kind of a big number, but that is what people believe, that don't ask about any help. And in fact, what we're doing this semester in the law schools is we're going in with some of the folks from the regulatory organizations to talk to students about kind of myth busting. Some of those things that they assume, because actually asking for help is not going to hurt your chances, but if you get in trouble because you didn't, then it's going to have a pretty big impact. The lawyers, the studies, what they found was that the general U.S. population has a 6.4 rate of problematic drinking, okay? And for all lawyers, that was 21%, and for attorneys under 30, it was, this is interesting. What does your slide show for the yellow one? Does it show ellipses? Because this is the first time I've seen this. It's had a different number. Let's see if I have it in my printout or if, yeah, 32% is what that number should be. For some reason, it didn't produce on this yellow cone here. But 32% of the attorneys under 30 meet criteria for problematic drinking. So it's the younger people. Now, why do you think that is? Any thoughts? Why do younger attorneys have a higher rate of problematic drinking than the average? We've got answers, but I want to see if anybody has opinions. Yes?
I think there's a higher pressure for people to get out and socialize and meet people, and a lot of times that means drinking.
Mm-hmm. Higher pressure to get out and socialize, all that networking you're supposed to do, all those happy hours. We're trying to really work with folks to say, it's fine to have alcohol, but make it just as easy to get something that isn't, so that people have an easy choice. You get lime and tonic water, nobody knows what you're having, You can even, so there's lots of ways to do that. But yeah, that's one, I think, one example that's a really good one. Other thoughts about it? Do you think the market has something to do with it? A lot of people think it does. That the additional stress of the job market and what are my prospects and what percentage of my class is getting jobs, that's a factor. Another thing that people have come up with with when we've asked questions about this is that, as you get older, you don't have as much time. It kind of goes to your point where you're encouraged to go out and make all of these connections. Well, maybe by the time you're 10 years older, you've made them and you're home with your kids. So that can be another factor where people just aren't engaging as much. And when we talk about problematic drinking, we're not talking about people who have to stop. We're talking about people who are drinking in unhealthy ways. And the underlying question is, why is that? Why are people doing that? Why is that the choice that people are making? In addition, the lawyer study showed that, and this is over the course of one's career, that 28% met the criteria for depression, 19% severe anxiety, 23% stress at a level that would be considered debilitating, and 11.5% had actually thought about suicide during their careers. That was a real scary one to people in lawyer assistance programs, because that's something we try to talk about suicide prevention and we try to offer resources, and yet people were still thinking about that. Question, yes?
How does those percentages compare to non-lawyers?
This 11, how this compares to non-lawyers, this particular percentage doesn't really have a corollary out there, but there was a study done in Canada a number of years ago where the life insurance companies did it, and they wanted to know why they were paying out more insurance for people who were employed in the legal profession than the rest of the population. And what they came up with was up to 6 times more. Now, I've talked to the director of SAVE, which is based here, Suicide Awareness Voices of Education, and he says, well, that's one sample and it's by one place, and he didn't think that 6 times as much was what he would go with, but he said, I wouldn't be surprised if it's half that number. And I think that one of the reasons and this is suicidal thoughts, by the way, not people who have died by suicide. But we do have a higher rate of dying by suicide, and that's actually where we have the statistics. And where that often comes from is that lawyers are, we try to be perfect. We try to not make any mistakes. We try to make sure we have everything lined up so it's not going to fail. And so we plan our suicides really well. And unfortunately, that's one of the reasons that we die more often. In the general adult population, most people who attempt suicide do not die by suicide. In the over 65 population, however, it's a much higher percentage of those who attempt suicide. So those are just a few kind of random things about the fact that this is a serious and important issue. So what they found generally was the younger the lawyer and the newer the lawyer, the greatest likelihood of alcohol use disorder or depression, which is opposite of what we thought before, which was that the older you got, the more it built up, and the harder it would be. And that's not what they found in this particular study. Not wanting others to know that they needed help, and concerns regarding confidentiality. In other words, stigma. The kinds of things, the biases we have about what we think about mental health that keep us from getting help. Those are the kinds of things that stand in the way. And so that's why we're here today. So this report was released in February 26th, and at the 2016 ABA annual meeting, these 3 groups, the Commission on Lawyer Assistance Programs, the National Organization of Bar Counsel, and the Association of Professional Responsibility Lawyers, so those are the ones that defend people who get in trouble, got together and said, you know what? What next? What do we do? Because we can't just put this report on a shelf. And so they formed this task force, which the idea was to create a movement toward improving the health and well-being of the legal profession. Can we actually do that? And it was a very ambitious group, and I think they did some amazing things. I had a good chance to participate sort of on the fringes. I wasn't one of the writers, but we had sort of a second wave of people involved. And so we not only talked about impairment, but we're also focusing on well-being. What do we do about it? And there were 7 groups of stakeholders that were identified: judges, regulators, legal employers, law schools, bar associations, professional liability carriers, and lawyer assistance programs. And I'm going to spend a little time on the recommendations for the judiciary and the recommendations for legal employers today, because if I did more than that, I would be just reading slides. Of these areas, are there any others that people say, well, I'd really like to hear about some of the regulations or recommendations for some of these others? Any thoughts on that? Okay, well, Liz will post this as well as the report on the law library page, and you can look at it and see what they are. The PowerPoint gives the quick and dirty. The report itself goes into much more detail on all of these. So when we look at our profession, our population, if you think about what we do, we are a profession that works on commission. We wait for something to happen. We don't have work until somebody has a problem. Whether it's you're involved in an administrative agency where you're looking at regulations, there's an issue that's identified. Whether you're a lawyer that might be in a litigation practice, there's an issue that's identified. Somebody comes to you, someone is a client. If you're working in the judiciary as a clerk or otherwise, somebody has a problem and it gets big enough that it goes to court. And so it becomes hard for us in our population. We get used to waiting until somebody else does something before we have to do something. And that is why we have to be proactive. And that is why we have this chart, which shows our challenges on one side, which is, we've got all of these statistics I told you about. We don't get enough sleep, work-life conflict, job dissatisfaction, okay? Work addiction, how about that? So these are all our problems. It's a problem, but we're waiting for someone else to do something. And if we can turn that around and we can look at the other side of the scale, and we can say, okay, what is our potential here? So if a quarter of us, 20%, depending on what survey you're looking at, are problem drinkers, if we're drinking in unhealthy ways, well, what are we doing to do something that's physically strong for us, that makes us more healthy? That instead of going to that option, which is reduce our stress by drinking, we reduce our stress by getting better exercise and engaging in healthy lifestyle choices. We have to affirmatively say, this is something I can do instead. And so this scale is a way to kind of show the flip side of all of these problems we identified in a really kind of simple and quick way. And because as lawyers, we're always looking for the worst that could happen. I mean, that's our jobs, right? What are all of the eventualities that could occur with this legal problem that is here, and what do we do to prevent? What do we do to create a remedy? What do we do to anticipate where this might go so that we put something out there that anticipates that? And so if we take that pessimism and we take it into other parts of our lives, including there's really nothing that can be done about the stress. And there are other ways to look at it, which is what the whole concept of well-being is about, which is hard for lawyers. So you have a handout that is this, and I want to spend a little time on this. When you look at the concept of well-being, there are between 5 and 7 factors that people usually pick out, and this group decided to go with 6. And so we've got emotional, occupational, intellectual, spiritual, physical, and social. Some of these are obvious. Well-being, occupational, do you have satisfaction in your work? Do you feel financially stable? Is your occupational well-being? How many of you are in judicial clerk positions? Okay, so either you have jobs or you are hoping to get a job, but you've got that transition to make. And so there's some stress there in terms of either the next job. Some of you might be going to places where you come in as a second or a third year associate, and you're expected to know all of the things that a first or a second year associate would have learned in terms of the basics of doing work within a law firm or with an environment. And I can tell you that over the years, we've gotten some calls at LCL from judicial clerks who have now gone to the next job who say, I don't know how to do the basic stuff that they taught everybody, and I don't know how to ask for it. And we suggest, finding a mentor who maybe was a year ahead of you with your judge and talking with them about how they made that transition. I mean, thinking about ways where this is going to be a stressful thing in my next step. So what is it that I might plan for now? And so, for example, those of you who might have a term ending at the end of July, have you met your judge's past clerk? And is that someone you know? And is that someone you can have lunch with and say, talk to me about your transition. What went well? What didn't? What should I be planning for now? Those kinds of things. And so we can anticipate what does occupational well-being mean to us, And are there some things we can do, looking at the right side of that scales of justice, to prepare to reduce the impact of the things that might be stressful to us? Any thoughts on that? Those transitions? Anybody that's gone through one of those transitions that has any thoughts? I know you usually don't have comments and questions, but I ask it. The next one is intellectual, and this is what we tend to think of as what's going to be satisfying to us as lawyers. We're learning, and we have activities that continue to engage us in terms of our intellectual capabilities. But there's another part of this intellectual piece that is going to be very important to well-being, and that is that it is a real challenge for lawyers as they get older to make the decision to retire or step away. Now, sometimes there are age limits, but other times there's really no plan and there's just a hope that someone will figure it out. And as my generation, the baby boomers, is getting older, there is this very large bubble of people who are starting to get to the point where they probably ought to retire, but it's possible, because they're at greater risk for this, that there might be some cognitive issues that keep them from seeing that. And I see a lot of younger people here. You're going to be the ones that have to deal with this. You're going to be the ones that are faced with this. Younger than me and all the way down to just out of law school. It's going to be a challenge. When we look at emotional, it's like in law school and as a lawyer, never let them see you sweat, not showing your emotions. And yet we are seeing these incredibly traumatic fact situations. And we are seeing these incredibly traumatized people who are seeking legal help. And we need to take care of ourselves emotionally so that we can be a good lawyer for them. There's a concept called compassion fatigue, which I have come to disagree with, because compassion is where you feel for somebody. But what I think we have in our profession is something called empathy distress fatigue, which is where you have that empathy for somebody, which is important, but you cross the boundary. You crawl into that hole with them, where they are feeling all of those emotions, and then you become less able to help them because you're too tied up and affected by it. And if you're not engaged in good self-care and you don't have good ways to draw your boundaries, that's going to impact you. Whereas if you're working from a sense of compassion, then you can see the person as somebody that you are separated from, but there to assist, and it's going to be better for your mental health. Now we think about, okay, social, physical, and spiritual. How's that related to the practice of law? And spiritual is simply your sense of meaningfulness and purpose. Is there a purpose in what I do? Am I happy about it? That's what that means. Physical is, are you taking care of the machine? You have to update your computer, and you have to put new toner in your printer, and you have to do other things to maintain the equipment that you use to be a lawyer. And the equipment also includes our physical selves. And we don't always maintain that terribly well because we think that we don't have time or we're too smart. Our cars can't live on cigarettes and Pepsi, but somehow we think we can. And then that social thing, I can tell you that lack of connection is probably responsible for more impact of trauma and more professional responsibility claims than any of these others, because people simply aren't relating to others to kind of have some help in doing the next right thing. And that lack of social connection, that isolation, can be a very serious problem in terms of both, are you making good decisions around your clients, and are you making good decisions about yourself? So you have that in front of you. Any thoughts about these concepts of well-being? A continuous process in which lawyers strive for thriving in each dimension of their lives. If you think about a battery, and one of the cells is low, that's how well it works. And so if one of these is really struggling, then it may not matter how well you're doing in another. Overall, you may not be doing that well. Any comments? Anything resonate with you that you saw here? these are ideas that I think people think about, and if you think about what's one thing that you might be able to do to improve your well-being personally. I talked to someone yesterday who said, I attended a seminar where you said, what's one thing that you can do? And I thought about one of the things that really bothers me, which is that, and this is a person who is fortunate to be in a job where they actually do work 9 to 5, unlike a lot of us. But their work time was early to like 4:30. And they said, I really missed that time in the morning. It was time that I used to really take. And so they asked to move their starting time by an hour and to stay late an hour later. And they said it made such a tremendous difference. It's a very small thing. But they said, I was able to have that me time and be refreshed and ready to go in and ready to really take it all on. So you can think about, what's one little thing that's bothering you that you might be able to do something about just by making the decision to do it. So in putting together this task force, they were seeing 3 reasons to do something. One is that it's really expensive to replace people. It's really expensive when a lawyer is struggling and the organization is trying to pretend it's not there, but talking about it all the time and not getting their work done. And so it's really something that's critical to organizational success. It's also an ethical issue. Non-communication is an issue. It affects competence. It affects diligence when someone is not engaged in well-being. And it's simply the right thing to do. And so there's 5 core steps that were identified. One is, who are the stakeholders? What are their roles in bringing about change? And this cannot be something where, LCL will take care of it, or somebody else will take care of it. Because each of you has your own personal sphere where you are a leader. And it might be your own life. It might be within your work group. It might be in another setting where you can say, well-being is important to me and I am going to model that behavior. And so who are those stakeholders? And I can tell you that in Minnesota, there is some interest from the Supreme Court in taking a look at this report, and they have met and talked about it, and there's some things starting to happen, and so watch for that. And it's going to have to be important that the leaders in this profession say this is something that we have to do. We have to look at the stigma that keeps people from getting help that they need. And that means understanding that anybody can be affected by a mental health issue. Anybody can be affected by stress. Anybody can be affected by finding that they've lost control of their drinking. Anybody can get some prescription pain meds and find that the withdrawal is so difficult that they pretend they still have pain and ask for more. These are the kinds of things that are happening in our profession, and we think that we're the only ones. And yet being able to say, you know what, I don't have to live this way, and it's okay to ask for help. So by telling our stories and talking, that's what we're doing with this particular step, is people are telling their stories about what it was like, what happened, and how it is today, because they've started dealing with their well-being. Looking at this being part of the duty of competence. Some of you may know Cassie Hansen, who works at the Lawyers Board. She and I did a CLE together last week on this, and we're presenting at another conference, really talking about how you're going to be a better lawyer if you are paying attention to your well-being. Looking at doing additional education, like the stuff we're doing here, other programs we've done for the law library, and other locations. And then really looking at how to make this a top priority for the profession as a whole, so that bar leaders are looking at it, and people who are able to model well-being and have chosen to do so are able to say that they're doing so and that it's important to them. So I'm going to go through some of the general recommendations. Any comments about those 5 core steps before I go on? So the first thing is acknowledging the problem and taking responsibility. And I kind of referred to that earlier, which is that we wait for something else to happen. That we wait until someone has a problem before we have work, so we do that in our own personal lives as well, and then that means we just sometimes don't do it. And so every part of the profession should support well-being. Now, these are recommendations. They're not things that are happening. There's going to be some eye rolls. There's going to be some, well, that'll never work, and that's fine, but it starts to get talked about. And what is that sphere where you can take a leadership role? One of the things that I saw in the last issue of Bench and Bar that just came out that had Me Too on the cover was a column by the MSBA president, Sonia Miller Van Ort, where she talked about when you, and this was more related to people making inappropriate comments, but when she said, you know, you hear somebody make an outrageous comment and you just wouldn't know what to say, so you just didn't, and you wished you had later and that sort of thing. And I wonder if we can apply that same sort of idea to well-being, and her suggestion was that you think about how you might react to a situation and what you might say to interrupt inappropriate behavior. And I would say let's do that for our own well-being, so that when someone brags about needing 4 hours of sleep at night, research clearly shows that limited sleep is equal to twice the legal limit of drinking in terms of your competence on the road, things like that. And there are so many ways in which we do not perform well if we don't get enough sleep, and yet we brag about that. So if you're a person who brags about not getting enough sleep, think about that. Think about why you do that. Think about, let's have some group yawns here. I saw one. Think about why it's okay to brag about that. What is that? Well, you know, what are this passive denial of problems? It's okay, I just can't get enough sleep. Well, why not? Who tells you you can't go to bed on time? What's in the way? And are you creating those things, or are they really there? Because if you're creating them because you think you need to be up late and try to get lots of things done, that's one issue. If someone else is requiring that of you, then maybe that's not the best place for you to be, because that is not a reasonable workplace. And granted, we all have busy times, but that's a very important factor. And I would encourage you to take a look at that in yourself. What problem might you be denying? Or what problem might you see in somebody else where you can say, well, have you thought about doing it differently? Or the person who always eats lunch at their desk and it's a bag of popcorn, maybe it's someone you'd like to have lunch with once in a while. Ways in which we can each acknowledge that this is a concern, this is important, if you decide that it is important. And of course, that's where you've got to go first. How do we have a profession-wide action plan? This is not easy. It's overwhelming. It's insurmountable. And so we need an organized coalition. And I referred to that earlier. There are going to be some things happening. And we're going to be looking for people who are interested in engaging on this, because it's got to be in many different sectors, and it's got to be something that's seen as critical as diversity and inclusion, because actually it is a diversity and inclusion issue. There's double stigma, where people who are from underrepresented groups don't always get the second chances, and so there's less likelihood that people will ask for help. And so it's as important as a lot of these other things. What kinds of well-being can leaders engage in? And this is kind of going back to your personal sphere. I recognize a few faces, but most of you I don't know. Maybe some of you are leaders in your organizations, your workplaces, your neighborhoods, your communities. And so what role modeling can you do? What can you do to commit to the core values of well-being? I'll give you one very small example. I presented at a law firm, and it was a smaller firm, and they were in a suburb, and they had a window and a wooded area. And I learned that a couple of the partners had bird feeders outside of their windows. And I don't know if it was a managing partner, but it was somebody else who said, well, you know, I'm going to put a bird feeder outside the conference room window and get a bird book. It seems like a really small thing, but the idea that the managing partner was making it okay for people to spend time talking about what bird they saw can change the way people talk to each other. And so it seems like a very small thing, but it was something that that person thought they could do to get conversations going differently within that law firm. So what does your creative ability tell you that you might be able to do to model that? How do we destigmatize help-seeking behaviors? Now, I have a colleague who presents a lot to law schools, and this is his idea, so I'm giving him credit. He said, you know, I try to get to the gym and I work out, I take care of my physical health. And I'm dealing with a lot of stuff, talking to people with problems, so I see a therapist, so I can work through that. And I take care of my mental health. And I think they are absolutely equal. That it's as important for me to see my counselor as it is for me to go to the gym. And that's what he wants the law students he's talking to be thinking about. But this stigma that nobody else is doing it, that it will be seen as a weakness, that a weakness in me is seen as a weakness in my case. These are the things that are keeping us from getting help. And these are the kinds of things that result in those statistics I showed you earlier. And these are the kinds of things that can result in careers, families, and lives being lost because people simply will not get the help they need. And so you may have seen the Channel 2 effort called Make It Okay, which is if you say to somebody, how are you doing? And they say, fine. So, no, really, how are you doing? And they say, well, I've had kind of a tough time. Have the conversation. Say, well, tell me about that. It's not your job to fix it. Just like when you have a client come into you who says, here's everything that happened. Well, maybe there's a legal solution, maybe there isn't. But it's not your job to fix their life. It's your job to try and deal with their legal problem. And so maybe that conversation, that reach out, that conversation you can have with somebody who has been willing to open up a little bit is going to make a difference. And in Minnesota, we have to ask twice. Anybody ever heard of Howard Moore? You kind of look like a young crowd, so maybe not. But he's a writer who talks about how to talk Minnesotan. But he says you have to ask twice. Well, would you like some coffee? No, I'm fine. No, really, it's no trouble. I can give you some coffee. Well, all right then, if it's no trouble. All right. So one of our volunteers tells the story about when he was actually in law school. He said, I was really struggling. My drinking was kind of out of control. I didn't realize it at the time, but it turned out I was pretty depressed. And a classmate said to him, you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Because the first thing we do is react when we push away. And he said, I hadn't felt a lot for a while. I hadn't felt like much of anything, which is a symptom of depression. But I had an overwhelming desire right then, and that desire was that he asked again, because I wanted to change my answer, because I thought maybe he'd be able to help. So in Minnesota, you have to ask twice. So think about someone you might be concerned about, or be willing to make that call and say, yeah, I'd like to talk with a counselor, I'd like to talk with someone. Or if there's something in your workplace where you have an ally, where you can say, can we kind of talk about what just happened? There are so many ways to get help and not do it by yourself. We're not like the toddler that I saw marching in front of her parents, stomping her feet, saying, I'll do it myself when they made a suggestion. We can't do that. We have to help each other, and we have to be there for each other. So each of you, when you were sworn in, had this program that was handed out at the admission ceremony, and on it was the lawyer's pledge of professionalism. You may have read it, you may not have, you may still have it. I think it's possibly on the court's website or the lawyer registration website. I'm not sure where you would find it these days. I looked for it and I didn't find it. But it calls for collegiality and respectful engagement. This is important because at the end of the day, you've got two people who believe strongly in their clients' causes who are doing their best job to argue that point. That's it. It's not about the jerk that the other lawyer is or being the biggest jerk you can be. These are the kinds of things that are going to get you burned out. They're going to cause mental health issues, and it's something that is part of that toxicity in our profession, where the way we treat each other is making a bigger difference than just about anything else. And we're going to be far less productive if we're dealing with it, or if we're trying to figure out how to do it. So this is real rose-colored glasses stuff here. And yet it's terribly important, and I think it's the kind of stuff to have conversations about. And I think that if you're in a mentoring position and you see someone who's trying to be the biggest, well, I'm just going to say this because it's badassery is sort of a pretty big term right now. They're trying to be the biggest one, okay, to prove that they're better. Maybe your mentoring can say, no, you don't have to go there. And those are just little things that we can do. There's great recommendations about lawyer assistance programs. One is that people understand that we can be a partner in doing all of this. Yesterday I met with a law firm that wants to set up a well-being program, and we talked about some elements of it, but we're not going to come in and do it for them. I gave them some resources. We can be a partner. We can help. We have lots of ideas. We know where the resources are. You can call. You can call and say, I'm having a difficult I need to have a difficult conversation with someone. And we will coach you. We will help you. I'll tell you a little bit more about what we do a little later. Guide and support the transition of older lawyers. This is what I talked about a little bit earlier. Senior lawyers have a wealth of experience. And in Minnesota, we have the opportunity for the you can do pro bono work and maintain a limited license, the emeritus program. They can mentor new lawyers, but there is a risk the older we get that there are going to be cognitive difficulties. And helping people who need to retire is going to be very, very important. And I think that there's going to be more that gets developed on that. It's a very tough position to be a younger lawyer who is working with somebody who is supposed to be the bomb, and you're not quite sure why. Because the gradual change in their cognitive abilities has not been noticed so much by the people who were around them all the time, but it's noticed by somebody who's new to the environment. And so some of you who look particularly younger to me might be the ones that are calling us and saying, how do I deal with this, and who do I talk to, and what do I say? Because this issue is going on. And that's something that can be helped as well. We also need to talk more about suicide prevention. We do have higher rates of suicide. We need to look at talking about it, making it okay to ask for help, that if somebody feels where it is a reasonable option, that sometimes is the best time to reach them, because if you ask openly, are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking of taking your life? Do you feel safe? At a point where they are starting to think that makes sense, they're going to think you get it. And that's a point where you can reach out to people. We actually have a whole program on a suicide prevention protocol that we will take into any place that will have us for that. And there are other organizations who will help, because this is too big a problem in our profession. So those are the general recommendations. And what kind of comments does anybody have, or thoughts? Just in case someone does, I'm going to ask. What's resonating with you? I'm just thinking that those wheels are turning so well that this is giving you some things to think about. This is really big, isn't it? I mean, it's like, really? They're saying this? Somebody's actually saying this? That's the reaction I get sometimes. Well, this will never work. And it's like, well, is there one thing you can do that might make a change in your life? Because starting to model that behavior, starting to say, I made a change, and it makes a difference. All right. Well, I told you that I'm going to spend a little time on 2 sets of recommendations, and then Liz will post the PowerPoint that's got the others, because we wouldn't have time to do all of them. So that's the way we decided to do this. So there are recommendations for the judiciary, and I'll go through those a little bit. First, I want to talk a little bit about the stress that goes on in the judicial system. And this impacts not only the judges, but it also impacts the people that work within that system. Think about the contentious, personal, and vitriolic proceedings, the cases, the facts, the fact that there are life-changing decisions being made every day, that decision burden, and the exposure to the trauma that other people are experiencing. The job itself, is the courthouse safe? The fact that someone might be up for election. Think about when somebody becomes a judge. Suddenly, they no longer have the privacy that they once had. And so the judge's staff may be one of the few places where they can be a little bit more open. And that's something where you can play a really important role if you are on staff. There have been new technology expectations, and that sometimes takes some time getting used to. There was a book published a number of years ago called The Gold Collar Workplace, which was about how people who use thinking to do their jobs will often be most impacted by the smallest thing, such as not knowing how the new phone system works and somebody not taking the time to train you so you can just understand the technology and then really do the part of your job you're supposed to do. And we have the public criticism for anybody who's in public life in the legal profession. It's just out there. I think that what we see is people in the judiciary, more than any other group, are possibly at risk for being held up to public exposure if they're known to have a problem. And so it becomes hidden rather than people asking for help. And sometimes staff and the lawyers can be enablers to kind of help cover up. And lawyers, you know, we have trouble asking for help because we give advice. Judges give orders. And so there's even bigger challenges there sometimes. So what are the recommendations for judges? Well-being is a priority. That should be in programming. Are there model policies? And does the court, within, whether it's the highest level or whether it's any other level in the state of Minnesota, does the court prioritize for the people that are within it? What if the judge has a problem? Is there a way to get somebody the help they need without it blowing up? And all of the divisions should have policies and protocols, and that should include the staff. Education should emphasize confidentiality, and what I will say about that is that LCL confidentially has the strongest confidentiality policy in the country. And if somebody calls us and says, I don't want to give you my name, but here's a way to identify me when we talk, I will accept whatever that is. And it's the same for the immediate group of counselors that we work with, which is an employee assistance program, where they will accept the name that someone chooses to give in order to get help. And so I think that has made a difference in people being able to do that. What about the stigma around mental health and substance use issues? One of the things we have seen, and this is both for judicial officers and staff, is that there is more training about substance use and mental health issues. There is more training about trauma in terms of what is going on in the courtroom and how not to trigger that and how not to create worse scenarios because of the way someone feels that they are treated. And it's not that I've necessarily seen that as a problem, but I think it's something that is really being seen as a concern. And that happens when people are talking to court staff as well. Of course, we encourage the judges around the state of Minnesota to know that there is also a judicial assistance program. This is a good one. Conduct judicial well-being surveys. You heard all about the lawyer well-being, or the lawyer impairment study, and you heard about the suffering and silence study of the law students, but what about the judges? Well, we have that going again. We've got another Minnesota connection, like I mentioned earlier, where there's a judge and a professor in the state of Minnesota, along with me, who are working on creating a survey for judges. In fact, we looked at our first draft yesterday to try and find the same sort of information that we have for lawyers and for law students. And what kind of programming for judges and staff? For those of you who are working as clerks or in other settings within serving the judiciary, do you have well-being programming? Is it something you would like to do? Is it something you can ask for? It can be CLE or it can be something else. There are people who will come in and lead meditation. There are people who will do all sorts of things to talk about well-being. There could be a place where you might go to a portal and look for resources. There's a lot of different things that can happen, and if people say, I would like this, I would like to see this, then it's going to be much more likely. And of course, we want people to partner with lawyer assistance programs. So those are some of the recommendations for judicial officers and people who work with them. I'm going to go through some of these others, just kind of giving you the headlines. The regulators, Director Humiston wrote an article that was in Bench and Bar about the OLPR's reaction to this report and some of the things that they put in place with related to their strategic plan. Is well-being a part of the lawyer's duty of competence? It's not in the rules, but we're talking about it together. We are looking at ways to collaborate more on continuing education. And one of the things that they are looking at is a centralized intake system to identify well-being issues, not just violation issues. Looking at student well-being through the admission process is another thing that is happening. There was a recommendation for conditional admission, which we have in Minnesota, I'm very proud to say. Legal employer recommendations. So what is the infrastructure to promote well-being? Is there, just as a law firm is going to have a compensation committee, and it's not just law firms, it can be any other employer, or they're going to have a diversity and inclusion committee, or they're going to have an ethics officer, can they put this at this level, where they have a committee that has top-down leadership? Are there ways that they can assess how things are going with the lawyers in the organization so that they have a sense of it? And where this is going to become an issue is that the malpractice carriers are thinking about turning this into a risk management issue. If the organization, the firm or other organization, isn't finding some way to look at how people are doing in the firm, if they are at risk for crashing and burning, if it's like we have no way of assessing or identifying, we have no way for someone to report if they're concerned about a lawyer, then that becomes a risk management issue, and it might cost more in terms of your malpractice policy. What are the policies and procedures within the organization? So, for example, does the insurance policy, the health insurance policy, give you the chance to opt out for mental health coverage? Many of them do. And the firm that I met with yesterday, I said, perhaps you could look at that and simply not have that option, that everybody has mental health coverage, whether it's something you have. It's part of the process you choose. What are the reporting relationships if somebody feels that someone else has a problem? The staff talk to each other. The lawyers are in silos. So the partners don't necessarily know that something is going on, but the staff sure do. And is there a safe way for them to talk about it? Is there a procedure? And what are some things that can be done to monitor for self-care? I talked with some of the lawyers at this firm yesterday, and one of the things they said is like, well, we know that when we have, and they have a particular type of practice, which I won't name, but when we've got this kind of thing going on, we're going to be working a lot of hours, but that isn't our normal. And one of the things we talked about is that the partners can help create an expectation for the associates that the new normal is not working on that big project, and that they can model that behavior, and they can make sure that they're not going to burn out those associates by saying, all right, remember that thing where we were working, we worked 80 hours last week? No, that's not what we do next week. That's not what is expected. And that was a really healthy conversation, I think, where they kind of were realizing that that was something that they would have something to say about, that the newer lawyers who were really the gunners thought that they had to be. And in fact, they didn't feel it was an expectation. And it's like, well, perhaps you are creating that expectation, and that's something to look at. And then there's things like, hey, you give a discount for a health club or something like that, so people will actually use it. And what are your procedures to, if you feel that somebody might have a kind of cognitive issues we talked about earlier? How do people connect? Do you have ways that are internalized where it's not just work all the time? The bird feeder I talked about earlier was an example of that. The firm is going to have social functions. It's a time to let down. Sometimes spouses and partners are invited. Make it just as easy not to drink alcohol. And that includes not just having a cooler that you can't find that's got the Diet Coke in it, but maybe having some interesting drinks. That, it's a big thing now to have a cocktail bar. Well, if you've got the 3 things you're serving, why not have an additional 2 that are options that are interesting and kind of fun that don't have alcohol? So that it's not so much you're one of those people, but today I'm choosing to have the other thing just because I think that sounds better. and make that behavior more normalized. That's, there are still firms that take the bar cart around at 3 o'clock on Friday afternoons, and maybe they should have some other options as well. It's like, what ones are those? That's where I want to go. And training and education, bringing CLEs as well as more kind of focused wellness programs into the organizations. And of course, making sure they know about lawyer assistance programs. What is their service-centered mission? It's going to be a more successful organization. And then there's got to be cultural factors instead of just the training. And you're hearing about the Me Too movement and all the things going on with that, and everything that's happening there says training is not just, you can't just have an hour of training. You've got to talk about it. You've got to hold people accountable and make it important. So I'm not going to go through the law school recommendations or the Bar Association recommendations or the professional liability carrier recommendations, but I will tell you that the recommendations for lawyer assistance programs are to emphasize confidentiality, that it's safe to call us, that there's someone available, and LCL, by the way, does follow the ABA recommendations for foundational elements, and we try to do as much programming as we can. We are looking for the opportunity to have the resources we need to do what we do. And so why this is important? How many of you saw the article in the New York Times called The Lawyer, the Addict last summer? A few of you. This was a story about a lawyer who was actually, I think, trying to email or set up a conference call while they were actually overdosing. This is someone who was taking amazing amounts of drugs and still trying to function in a high-powered law firm environment. And then we have high-profile lawyer suicides, and we have lawyers with depression, and we have other things going on. But we also have lawyers who are really loving their jobs. And those are the ones we have to start hearing the news stories about. Those are the ones we have to think about modeling ourselves after. The ones who feel like we're doing the best work we can, we're making a difference for our clients, and we're making a difference in our communities. So to finish, and I'll stick around with questions because I figured people weren't going to have them since they didn't earlier. What I want you to know about LCL, and if you didn't pick up a brochure on your way in, please do. It's not because you need it. You might know someone who does someday. And pick up the cool LCL pen. It's got a little tiny stress ball at the end, which is also a stylus. If you wish it worked, it tells you who to call. So our services are free, confidential. There's a hotline 24 hours a day if you need someone then. And we do programs like this. We'll consult with individuals and organizations who are concerned about others. We offer up to 4 free counseling sessions. We have groups. We will talk with you about any issue that causes stress or distress. A lot of times people will say, I didn't know I could call LCL about that. If it's bothering you, we can have a conversation and we can come up with resources. I had a call from somebody who was dealing with the fact that they'd been in an apartment with bed bugs. And they just needed to talk to somebody about how awful that had been. That's the kind of thing you can call us for. And we have a partnership. You also have an EAP through your work if you're state employees, or many of you do in other environments. The Employee Assistance Program we work with understands lawyers. You can have up to 4 free counseling sessions. And it's on any issue, and it's statewide. So for those of you who are watching this remotely, you can find someone. You can stick a pin in the map if you don't want to go to someone in your community, and see how far you want to drive to see a counselor anywhere in the state of Minnesota. So this is our contact information. I'll stick around if people have questions. If you are watching this remotely, help@mnlcl.org comes directly to me. So thank you for your attention, and I appreciate you being here today.